You can have a seat. Hi, my name is Cameron. I'm one of the pastors here at Crosspoint. I don't know if Mac is in here. I think he probably will be here next service with his wife. I'd like to make a public rebuttal to this pizza nonsense. First, okay, he had me thrown off a little bit. I was like, you're right, pizza. But where does it end? Like, you bake a turkey, that's not a baked treat. It's ridiculous. All right, we have a little bit of a weird passage today. And it's not weird in like, whoa, all this crazy stuff is happening. It's weird in the sense that if you were just reading the Bible, you would just go, that's weird, and probably keep moving, which is what I've done lots of times until I'm like, oh, wait, I have to talk about this. And so in order to kind of figure out what this means, what bearing this has for us today, first we need to talk about movies, okay? I have a confession to make, which is probably going to really bother some of you, and that is that I've never been a big fan of Marvel movies, okay? And I'm really sorry. I know some of you are probably happy. Some of you are mad at me right now. And this is really weird, okay? Because I love action movies, so it's not like, oh, they don't have enough substance for me. Like, I love stupid action movies. I love a lot of nerdy things. Like, in a different life, and I'm very close to the point where, like, in high school, I could have learned Elvish from Lord of the Rings. Like, I'm a very nerdy person, naturally. But this all stems back to 2012. I had a friend who was like, hey, we should see this new movie, The Avengers. I'm like, I don't know if I really want to go. And he's like, oh, come on, I'll pay for you. And one thing you need to know about me is I love free stuff. Anytime I help someone move and they're like, oh, don't move that, we're gonna take it to Goodwill, I kind of peek out of wherever I'm like, I'll take a look at it, like, let me bring it home. Like half the furniture in our house is free from helping people move and be like, I'll take it to Goodwill for you, and then just finding a spot for it in my house. So when he said, like, I'll pay for you, I was like, oh, I can't say no to that. Like, that sounds awesome. So we go to this movie, and I did not know what I was getting myself into, right? Because Marvel movies were still relatively new, and this whole, like, crossover thing was, like, relatively new. Like, now you know Marvel movies, there's, like, all this crossover, and you kind of have to know all the different characters. So I had seen, like, Iron Man, and I go in, and I'm like, who is this like Thor guy? Who is Captain America? And I was just like annoyed the whole time that I hadn't done my homework before seeing this movie and had no idea what was happening for most of it. And from that moment on, it's just like, I was kind of like annoyed. Like I can't do this. Like I don't have the time for this. I don't have time to do homework before I go see a movie. I'm just kind of checked out. Now, this kind of speaks to genres, right? The Marvel movies are like their own genre of movie within action movies. And a genre is like a category, right? It's like pop and rock and rap, like those are all genres of music. And sometimes like genres are meant to be experienced in different ways, right? Like the way you might watch an action movie is different than the way you might watch a comedy movie. And most of the time in our culture, we're just naturally really good. Like sometimes we're surprised, like when I went to see The Avengers, but most of the time we're really good at being able to intuit like what type of movie you're about to watch, just by looking at some movie posters. So here's like the first category here. You know by seeing those posters, whether you've seen the movies or not, what type of movie you're in for. If you watch, like if you see Matthew McConaughey leaning on someone, you know it's gonna be like cute, it's probably gonna be funny about 2/3 of the way through, like things are gonna turn really bad, but then it's all gonna come around in the end and you're gonna leave like feeling good and it'll be romantic. These other movies, like posters are really good at kind of cluing us into this. Here's the next category. There we go, thank you. Is like a war movie, right? If you see something like this, you know what type of movie you're gonna go see. There's gonna be action, it might be kind of intense. There's gonna be like these tales of heroism and like, you know, at some point, like it's gonna look like all hope is lost and then someone's gonna come through and it's all gonna kind of work out even if like you lost some people along the way. This third category, like these are like, you know, science fiction, fantasy, like they all have like a look to them. So when you go to see one of these movies, you kind of know what you're in for, like what you're getting yourself into. Then we have kids movies, which are great, right? They cue you into being kids movies, but they also kind of like tie in like Toy Story. You know it's gonna be an action movie, or like Bad Guys. You don't have to see the movie. You know it's probably gonna be like a heist movie. You have like money, car chase, all this stuff going on. And so naturally, we kind of get clued into these different genres of whether it's movies or music that we experience and know what to expect going into it, right? Like you would watch Toy Story very differently than you'd watch Saving Private Ryan, right? You'd have different expectations going into those movies about what kind of you're looking for and what makes it good, right? A comedy is good because you laugh, a drama is good because you feel something, an action movie is good because you're like entertained by all the things going on. Now, when we're talking about genre, the same is true for the Bible, okay? Is that there are a lot of different genres in the Bible. The Bible is really more like a library of books than just one book, even though it's bound all together. And different genres require reading differently. Like you have to know kind of what you're getting yourself into when you read it in order to best understand what's going on. Now, of course, God's Spirit is very graceful, and so even when we don't know what's going on when we read it, like God will still speak to us and help like connect things with our life. But for the best chance of understanding it, you need to know what type of book you're reading when you open up the Bible. Because understanding genre is one of the essential components. Like you would read something from Proverbs, which is all about like wisdom, very differently than you'd read something like the book of Revelation, which is like apocalyptic and like this very like imagery-focused, future-oriented thing, which is very different than you might read something in the book of Genesis that's like narrative and story, which is very different than you might read like something from the book of Psalms, which is very like poetic and like connecting with us in that way. And when we read something from the Bible and kind of import the wrong expectations in, it's kind of like, I don't know if you guys remember, I was gonna show some horror movies, but all the like covers were really scary. But there was an old movie called The Ring, right? If you went to that expecting it to be a romantic comedy about an engagement ring, you would be sorely disappointed in what you went to watch. And in the same way, a lot of times what can happen is we will import either a different expectation or like a more modern expectation into the Bible when we read it, and read it through like these lenses that are not even close to what the original people reading it would have had. And so it can lead to a lot of misunderstandings. Now, all that to say, when we're reading the book of Acts, most of it is narrative. So it's stories, okay? And when it comes to story in the Bible, a lot of it is what's called descriptive. Okay, so prescriptive, if you think of like a doctor prescribes you something, that's like, hey, this is what you should do. A lot of the stories in the Bible are much more descriptive. Like it's not like, hey, just do whatever this person does, because the Bible is actually full of a lot of people who did a lot of bad things, right? And so when these characters and these people are included, we're not just supposed to follow whatever it is they do. The Bible is often describing events that happen, but describing them in a way that we're supposed to understand like what to kind of do with this thing that we're reading or that we're listening to. It's described for a reason in a certain way to communicate a point. And the truth in application is not just imitating, but trying to figure out, okay, like why is this here? What did this mean for people? And then like, what does this mean for us? Because we have to remember each of these documents, each of these books in the Bible was like a historical document written by someone to someone at like a specific point in history. And so while we talk about like the Bible being like written to us, and that is true on a lot of levels, it's also not true in the sense like the same way that I would write a letter to you. There's a whole lot more like cultural things going on and genre things going on that we have to understand. And so we can't just always like take it out and like import it really nicely and neatly into our modern world and our modern life and expect it to work or be even what God is trying to say to us. And so our story today definitely falls into like this descriptive camp. Like this is something Luke is describing and we're not supposed to imitate. So the question then becomes like, why is this here and what are we supposed to do with this? Like why did Luke include this in the first place? Because he did include it for a reason. And there's like little ways like in narrative and in story where they can like kind of clue you in like who's the good guy and who's the bad guy, kind of who you're supposed to follow and who you're not supposed to follow. And there's really none of that. It's like this event that's kind of plopped down. It's like, okay, I don't know, what are we supposed to do with that today? Like why did Luke include this? Now, before we actually get to our passage, this is kind of like when you like watch a series on Netflix or something and it's a new season, And they're like, previously on the book of Acts. I can kind of do a little recap of something that happened. They're like, oh, you should remember this event because it's going to come up again. That's kind of what this is. So Acts 13, a couple chapters earlier, there was an event that happened. Now in the church at Antioch, there were prophets and teachers, Barnabas, Simeon called Niger, Lucius of Cyrene, Manaen, who had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch, and Saul. So if you've been around or you've kind of read the book of Acts, you know Barnabas and Saul are kind of like the two main characters in this section or this season of the book of Acts. While they were worshiping the Lord and fasting, the Holy Spirit said, set apart for me Barnabas and Saul for the work which I have called them. ... It kind of like skips around. I'm not going to read this whole thing for you. The two of them, sent on their way by the Holy Spirit, went down to Seleucia and sailed from there to Cyprus. John was with them as their helper. Bunch of stuff happens. From Paphos, Paul and his companions sailed to Perga in Pamphylia, where John left them to return to Jerusalem. So there's this guy named John, sometimes called Mark, sometimes called John Mark. It's a little confusing. But John Mark leaves them as they're on their journey, and they're about to start this whole rest of this big missionary journey into this whole area where they're going to travel like 1,000 miles, and it's going to take a few years for them to do this. So lots of time now has happened. This whole missionary journey has happened. If you were here last week, you know that like there was this big council as the church and the gospel is advancing into these Gentile or non-Jewish areas. There's like these big questions about like, okay, like, well, like do Gentiles have to become Jews in order to become Christians? And there was a very divisive, like lots of different opinions. And yet there was this big council where there was this unity around like, okay, no, they don't. Like Jesus is open to everyone. You don't have to become Jewish first. So if you missed this, you should definitely either read Acts 15 later this week, or go back and listen to Mac's sermon, because it's like a pivotal moment in the book of Acts, kind of understanding what is going on here. So lots of time has passed. They have this big council, and there's this like beautiful moment of like, okay, we're all going to be together and moving forward. And this is our passage today, right after this big council. It's Acts 15, verses 35 to 41. So Paul and Barnabas remained in Antioch, which is kind of like their little home base, where they and many others taught and preached the word of the Lord. Sometime later, Paul said to Barnabas, let us go back and visit the believers in all the towns where we preach the word of the Lord and see how they are doing. So we're going to go back. Barnabas wanted to take John, also called Mark, with them. But Paul did not think it wise to take him because he had deserted them in Pamphylia, so the thing we just read about, and had not continued with them in the work. They had such a sharp disagreement that they parted company, which, by the way, sharp disagreement, as I was reading different, like, people much smarter than me writing about this passage, it's kind of like when your parents, when you're a kid and you hear that they were fighting, and you come out and you're like, is everything okay? They're like, oh no, we weren't fighting, we were just having a disagreement. You're like, call it what you want. Like, I know what was happening. So sharp disagreement was kind of like the cleaned up version of this event that happened between Barnabas and Saul, these two like pillars of the church in this chapter of the early church history in this area. So they had such a sharp disagreement, they parted company. Barnabas took Mark and sailed for Cyprus, John Mark, but Paul chose Silas and left, commended by the believers to the grace of the Lord. He went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. So what's happening here is we have this guy, John Mark. There's kind of three characters. John Mark, who had abandoned them, which we don't really have any idea of what exactly that means or why or what happened. We have Barnabas, who wants John Mark to go with them, right? There's a couple reasons for this. We find out later in the Bible that Barnabas and John Mark were probably somewhat related, right? So you always have a little extra grace for your family, or a little more understanding. Also, Barnabas is just the kind of guy, we don't know a lot about him compared to someone like Paul, but Barnabas is the kind of guy who likes to give people second chances, right? And take a chance on people. And actually earlier in the book of Acts, so Paul's history, if you don't remember, he used to be like just a Jew and he was going around and he was like leading all this like terrorizing the church and killing Christians and like leading persecution against these followers of Jesus. And then he has this dramatic moment where he comes to faith and decides to follow Jesus. And then like everyone's like, cool, that's awesome, but they're also a little worried about Paul, and they don't know if they really want to work with him or if they trust him yet. And Barnabas was the guy who kind of took Paul under his wing and like helped him like be a part of the Christian community and really become like this new leader in the Jesus movement. So Barnabas is a guy who likes to take chances on people and take risks and will reach out even if like there's evidence to the contrary. So this is kind of who Barnabas is and what he likes to do. Now, Paul also has some really good reasons, right, for not wanting Barnabas to go. If you remember during this first missionary journey, Paul had he'd almost been killed at one point. There's all these crazy things that are happening, like uprisings in the town they go through, all sorts of persecution. So Paul really wants people who are with him who are going to be like 100% in and committed. He doesn't want to be worried about if someone is going to like jump ship the first time things get hard. So as I'm sitting here reading and sitting with this passage, my question was like, okay, and like kind of digging into the backstory, I'll be like, well, who's right here? Like, I'm a little confused at what's going on. And Luke, as a writer, as like a narrative story writer, could have put some clues if we were supposed to be like, oh, Barnabas is the good guy or Paul is the good guy, but he didn't do that, right? Because relational conflicts are rarely that simple. They're messy, and in some ways they're both right? Like they're both bringing a true perspective. They're both seeing things just from a different perspective, and they're both like kind of right and both kind of wrong in their own way. And in my main question with this event, I realized like I was reflecting the polarized and politicized world we live in that's become so like black and white and very much like compromise is a bad word, especially when you look at like national politics. And like, well, you know, it's like if you're not with me, then you're the enemy, and like trying to figure out like who's the good guy, who's the bad guy. And it's just not that simple often. And, you know, I kind of leaned more towards Barnabas' side, but Luke kind of describes this event. And I think ultimately trying to figure out who's right and who's wrong, who we should follow, who we shouldn't, like who should we be more like Paul, should we be more like Barnabas? Those are the wrong questions. See, the problem isn't like what values they had going into this disagreement. Do we value like taking someone with us who has failed before and we want to restore them? Do we value bringing someone who is only going to be with us and help us really accomplish the work that God has set us out to do? Like we all have different values, and sometimes we have competing values, and that's actually a really good thing. Like I think of the people in my life, there's two people I thought of. I thought of my wife, Megan. We have very different values a lot of times. And ideally, in a perfect world, that's a really good thing, right? Because we can see things differently and we can like come to either an agreement or like I can see the situation or a problem happening in a more truthful, like full way than when I'm just looking at it myself. So I think the problem here isn't having different values. It's okay to have different values. And it's also okay to have such different values that it's like, hey, I don't know if we can work together or we can keep doing this. The problem is how Barnabas and Paul let their disagreements their different values create such a sharp disagreement that they couldn't even work together anymore. And that it kind of like blew up relationally when it really didn't need to. See, there is a way to move forward separately, but still maintaining some sort of unity and relationship. And there's a way to move forward separately that's full of like tension and anger and severs relationship, which is what happened here with Paul and Barnabas. So again, the question, like, why is this even here? Why are we reading this today? Why did Luke think this was important enough to include? It's definitely not very flattering for the early church, especially these kind of two pillars of this movement in this area, these people that as Luke's writing to people, like they all would have known Barnabas and Paul. So he's kind of like, you know, kind of recognizing, kind of airing out their dirty laundry a little bit. Some commentators say this, probably one of the reasons why Luke included this, is it was such a big deal, like, and everyone kind of knew about it, like it was kind of like the town gossip had kind of spread everywhere, that had Luke not included it, people would be like, wait a minute, I know something happened. This is not really what happened with Barnabas and Paul. Like they did not just peacefully part ways. I heard there was something going on, so Luke kind of had to include it. But I think Luke includes this for his readers like that are in the early church, this early Christian movement, because he wants to show them that God's work will not be stopped, right? This is a theme over and over and over again in the book of Acts, that no matter what happens with the laws and the rulers of the areas that the church is starting, God will not be stopped by those things. No matter what happens with the Jews and the religious leaders, God will not be stopped by these things. And here, no matter what happens with our dysfunction, God will not be stopped. Right? Even when Paul and Barnabas have this huge blow up that kind of causes all sorts of drama in the early Jesus movement, it's not going to stop the work the Spirit is doing through them. Because God can bring good out of even the most dysfunctional, unhealthy, and even outright evil situations. And I think it says a lot about God's goodness and God's power. And I think a lot of people get this a little bit backwards, okay? So God brings good things out of bad situations. And a lot of people, what happens is they see God bring something good out of a situation and then assume that that bad thing must have been part of God's plan for them in order to bring about this good thing. And I just do not see that happening at all in the Bible. Right, the Bible is full of stories of people who have done terrible things, and it's all about how God continues to bring good out of those bad things, not saying that those bad things are a good thing. So for example, I know I've used this example a lot. My mom passed away 8 years ago from cancer, right? And I can look back on that now and say, wow, God has brought a lot of good out of that situation. Like how I've been able to draw closer to God and the real hard stuff happening in my life. And how I've even been able to talk to other people who are going through really hard things and share from my own experience. But I think it would be wrong to say God killed my mom to teach me a few lessons. Right, it's not part of God's plan that bad things are going to happen to us, but it speaks to God's goodness and power that even in the worst things that happen, he can bring something good out of it if we're open to what he wants to do. It speaks to his ability to work through dysfunction and even outright evil. And Paul and Barnabas, I think Luke is pretty clear, they're in the wrong in the way this disagreement was handled, but God still worked through their dysfunction. So here's our bottom line for today. For us from this passage, is that we can trust that God is working things out even when our best efforts at relationship and unity fail. Now that last half is there, not because we see it in Paul and Barnabas, but I want to remind us that this is not a principle that we can use to just kind of release all responsibility and be cool, so I don't have to try hard in relationships because God will work things out. Right, that is not, if you hear that, that is not what I'm trying to say. Though that is what I'm tempted to do sometimes. I can be someone who easily will abdicate responsibility and just be you know what, God's got this. I'm sure it'll all work out fine. Do I have anyone else like that here who's it'll all work out, it's gonna be fine? Few people? All right, there's 3 of you who raised your hand. We'll have a little support meeting afterwards. Right, but that's not the point. The point is we're supposed to lean in and try to follow Jesus in the middle of disagreement and whatever difficult thing is happening, whether we're talking church directions, interpersonal relationships, what's happening in your family. Our job as followers of Jesus is to try to maintain unity and navigate interpersonal conflict in a Jesus-looking way, the way Jesus would. Being rooted in genuine love and concern for the other person, surrendering our own will and desire and submitting those to God and allowing his will to be bigger than our own will. We're supposed to be with grace. I think, recognizing that other people have a valid perspective. I wonder how different this would have gone had Barnabas and Paul just been able to be you know what, I don't agree with you, but I see how you got there. And that seems like a valid perspective. I wonder how this disagreement would have gone differently for them. I'm sure they would have still maybe split up because they disagreed, but it wouldn't have been this big drama-filled thing. So, yes, we have responsibility and we need to lean in with health and following Jesus. But the reality is that our best efforts at relationship and unity might not produce the outcome we want. And there still might be relational fractures and big blow-ups and things might not go the way we want them to. And we cannot control that because we can't control other people. I live with a 3-year-old right now and I'm learning this daily, that she will not be controlled at all, no matter how hard I try at times. Last night at 11 o'clock, I'm just, please go back to bed. No! I'm I don't know what to say to that. I have no answer. So there are people in this world who want nothing to do with me. And, I know, you'd be like, wow, that just seems shocking. There are people in this world who want nothing to do with me. And I look back years later and think like, I don't think I did anything wrong here. Like, I think I did everything I could, right? And then there are people in this world who want nothing to do with me. And I look back and be like, yeah, I kind of screwed that one up a little bit. Or we both kind of screwed that one up. And a passage like this isn't telling us not to try because God's working it out anyway, but it does help us not be so anxious about controlling the outcome of what's going to happen in every relationship or what's happening in our church or what's happening interpersonally in our life. Because God will always be working because that's who God is. Right, whether it's with your spouse, whether it's with a coworker, whether it is here at church or with a kid, like God is always working, even when we don't see the evidence of it on the outside. Like God is always at work. Even when we're doing our best and it doesn't seem like things are going well, we do not have to control the situation because God is ultimately the one in control and he's the one working things out. We don't have to control what happens to ensure that God's will happens, right? As if God's will is so fragile that like any little misstep that we do, like it's all just blown up. Like God will work things out, navigating the dysfunction and the outright evil in our world, and we just need to be faithful to what it is God is doing. And so as we wrap up here, I want to remind you that not only is God working in our dysfunction, despite our dysfunction, but he's also at work after we screw things up. And there's this great little passage in the Bible, in the book of Philemon. It's this little book. And the story of Paul and John Mark ends here in the book of Acts, but we have some of Paul's other writings. And he wrote this book called Philemon. And can you just put it up there, Jonathan? And he says, Epaphras, my fellow prisoner in Christ Jesus, sends you greetings, and so do Mark, not going to try that one, Demas, and Luke, my fellow workers. So there was this is like years later, and there was some sort of reconciliation between John Mark and Paul to the point where God had like brought them back together, and now Paul sees John Mark as a fellow worker. And I imagine with maybe a little more distance and time, Paul was able to see things a little more clearly and be able to accept John Mark for where he was at and who he was. And I'm sure God had done things in John Mark's life to help him grow and to become the person that he was. But no matter where relationships are at right now or whatever dysfunction has happened, God was working in the middle of that, but he's also working now trying to bring about reconciliation and restoration where it's appropriate. So there's hope that God is working in the mess and after the mess, working towards something good. And the question is, are we gonna let God work with us, or are we gonna make God work in spite of us? Right? We have a responsibility and an opportunity to join God's work, not just be another roadblock and another big roadblock of dysfunction in the way that God is trying to work through. So with our action steps, maybe you know kind of exactly what to do with this. That's great. Here's a few things to suggest in case you don't. So first, you can reflect on this. Do you tend towards controlling outcomes? Are you someone who wants to control everything in your life? Or are you more of an abdicating responsibility, I'm sure it'll all be fine? Why do you think that is? And what might God want to say to that? I've noticed in my own life, there's so much spiritual growth that comes from being able to recognize the why underneath and allow God to speak to that. Secondly, you could pray that God would show you how to love in a non-controlling way someone in your life you're struggling with relationally. I would assume we all have some relationship in our life that we're struggling with, whether it's a big one or a little one, a big situation, a small situation. And if you don't, that's awesome. You should lead the support group afterwards in the lobby today. But pray that God would show you. Oftentimes, our own imaginations for loving people are affected by the world around us and our upbringing, all these other things, and we try to love people in ways that are really unhelpful. So pray and ask God to show you and give you an imagination for what it would look like to love whoever it is that you're struggling with right now. And then, of course, this can't all just stay in our head. So take an appropriate Jesus-looking step of love towards that person this week. Maybe it is just prayer. Maybe they're not a safe person to talk to, but maybe it is reaching out or trying to connect with them in a positive way. So let me pray for us, and we can go enjoy the rest of our beautiful Sunday. God, thank you so much for this day. God, I thank you that you included stories in the Bible that show that these early church people were real people, and that they screwed things up and that things didn't always go perfectly. But God, that you are so good, you are working in spite of all of our screw ups and all of the things we mess up and all of our mistakes. So God, I ask that you would help us to not get torpedoed by our mistakes, but instead trust that you're working. I ask that you would help us to see the ways you're working. God, peel back the curtain a little bit and help us see the ways that you're working in the lives of ourselves, but also the people around us. And God, just give us vision for loving the people around us in a non-controlling way, but also in a non-just checking out way, that we would be able to love people the way that you loved people. In your name we pray, amen. All right, have a good week.